I'm Megan Skidmore, and this is Beyond the Shadow of Doubt. I am a woman, daughter, sister, spouse, mother, life coach, and person of faith on a mission to normalize asking questions and allowing doubts, not only in a faith journey, but in all aspects of life. Join me in bringing this traditionally taboo topic out of the shadows of shame and into the sunlight. I'm a firm believer that we normalize through more talking and having more discussion. When we're more authentic about our journey, we are more powerful because shame has no power in the face of authenticity. August of 2023 marks the 1-year anniversary of Beyond the Shadow of Doubt and 5,000 downloads. My genuine thanks. Subscribe if you have not, share a favorite episode with a friend, and leave a review on Apple Podcasts. Help me reach my goal of 10,000 downloads by the end of 2023. I am so excited to share with you that the Love Loud Music Festival is coming to the Lone Star State. Founded in 2017 by Dan Reynolds, Love Loud is a catalyst to bring communities and families together to help ignite the vital conversation about what it means to unconditionally love our LGBTQ plus friends and family. Love Loud offers hope to people, letting them know they're not alone and encouraging acceptance in the home and community. It all begins with talking, sharing, and showing the realities of what LGBTQ plus individuals face daily. If you are in Texas and interested in volunteering along with me and some of your fellow Texans, please reach out and I will connect you with the right person. I would love to stand side by side and serve along with you. More information is on their website, which I have listed in the show notes. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Beyond the Shadow of Doubt podcast today. I'm thrilled to have two guests with me to share their stories with you. To give a little preface, I volunteer with the Dallas Hope Charities. You may have seen on my Instagram account the Hopeful Spaces group that I facilitate, a group for parents and for allies. And I mention it on every single podcast episode. If you've heard me mention Hopeful Spaces, this is what I am referring to, my volunteer work with the Dallas Hope Charities. I wanted to give them the opportunity to share with all of you a little bit more about why the Dallas Hope Charities exists and what it is all about, and so that they could also share their stories and why it's important to them to be a part of this work as well. So if this is your first time joining or your 10th time, just a little background. I started this podcast as a way to normalize faith journeys, normalize asking questions and allowing doubts. For those who were raised in a conservative faith, traditionally, those are very taboo topics. And so this is me trying to normalize talking about all the uncomfortable things, challenging, perhaps long-held beliefs that could potentially be hurting us, hurting our family members, hurting our communities. So with that, I want to introduce both Sidney and Roscoe and give them an opportunity to share a little bit about your background and, your family, your work, profession, and even, your faith of origin, as much as you would like to share. Why don't you go ahead, Sidney?
Okay. My name is Sidney. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the Outreach and Education Engagement Manager for Dallas Hope Charities. I've been with the organization for about 2.5 years now, mostly just running our programs that aren't our housing program, and then doing community engagement work as well. I identify as an ally of the LGBT community. Growing up, my family was pretty religious, and they were kind of open to different LGBT identities and concepts and things like that. But it wasn't until college that I really got involved with the advocacy side of everything, and really just learning about different identities and kind of deconstructing my beliefs around gender and sexual orientation and things like that. And so I kind of got the chance to do that for a living, which has been great, in addition to being able to advocate for folks experiencing homelessness and low-income folks and stuff like that.
Awesome. I'd love to hear a little bit more about your deconstruction. We can get to that in a minute. Roscoe, you go ahead.
Thank you, Megan. My name is Roscoe Compton-Kelly, and I have been a board member with the board of directors for Dallas Hope Charities since 2019. I served as a board chairman for a period of that time frame up until March of this past year. And how I came to the organization was actually through part of my faith journey. I grew up in Southeast Texas, near Houston, in a town called Beaumont. My family is my mom's side of the family was Catholic. My dad's side of the family was Methodist. And so we had mixed blended religion household, but were raised primarily in the Catholic faith. And I coined this as what I call people deep Catholic. I was an altar boy, served on our parish youth board, did everything imaginable. My mom was on our parish council, and so we did a lot within the church. It was a family church to this day. It's over 150 years old. There's actually a bench that sits outside with a placard with the family names on it and family tree on it. And so this was always a big thing, from a religion standpoint for our family and being raised Catholic. And my dad's side of the family, though we didn't spend a lot of time in his church, he was still very much a person of faith as well, too. And so this was something that for me was instilled at a very young age in terms of religion and just my faith journey. And how I came to Dallas Hope Charities was actually through the meal programs that we did with conjunction with Cathedral of Hope. And that was actually how Dallas Hope Charities was born, was out of those meal programs. And so I had been involved with the church for several years before that, since 2015. And then when this opportunity came along to be able to serve on the board, I immediately jumped on it, knowing what I'd been through in my personal faith journey of coming out, experiencing that trauma between religion and in my personal faith,
Mhm.
and really navigating that space from coming out in high school all the way through college, and then eventually into my adult life as well too.
Okay, so you identify as LGBTQ plus,
Hmm.
as a gay man,
Yes.
and you came out in high school.
I came into high school. I was 17 when I came out.
You're 17, and having been raised deep Catholic, I'm can only imagine the roller coaster of emotions that you experienced.
Oh, very much so. For me, because it was such a part of my identity at that time, there are several sacraments that as a Catholic you go through. And, your intention is that you go through all these sacraments, by the time with that being the last rites is the final sacrament that you receive. And so, went through catechism classes. Like I said, I was an altar boy for several years. I sang in
Mhm.
the church as well too. And for me, this is something that is a good side note, is that I'm very much a person that I represent faith through song as a singer. And so for me, that was very much a journey through the church as well too. I played saxophone when I first started in the church band. And then one day I was sitting out in the front porch steps of the church, and our choir director's mom heard me just singing to myself as I was cleaning my saxophone. And she said, "Baby, put that saxophone down. You will no longer play that. You will be singing from here on out." And that's exactly what happened, is that I sang in the church from that point on. And so for me, just having that connection, to not only just the people, but also, in terms of faith in God, was important to me. And so when I came out of the closet at 17, there were several things that occurred in that time frame. One was my relationship with my mom. And, again, when I said my mom's side of the family was extremely, extremely faithful and religious. And there were also some factors that were in play that I was not aware of when I came out of the closet at the time. And so not knowing some of this information that was later shared, and I'll get into that in a second, really also colored into how my parents responded. My mom, in particular, I was really shocked about, because we had had conversations previous to me coming out that said, "Oh, I'll always love you no matter what, that's
Mhm.
fine, it's
Mhm.
okay." But then when the actual rubber met the road and I came out, the conversation changed very quickly. And to say that she raised a very stubborn child, put a pin on it very nicely. I take after them very well, I'll say. And I wasn't backing down. I was like, this is who I am. This is, a part of me, just like every other facet that I've grown up with. And, I'm standing my ground with this. And what really occurred within that is that, and I didn't know this, is that she was really battling with what all she had been taught in her faith as well too, as a Catholic. And so
Mhm.
there was this dynamic that was happening where I was going through this journey of faith and religion, and really thinking about this, and my mom was going through something very similarly at the same time. for me, I was also very involved in our youth parish council at the time. And so in the Catholic Church, we have dioceses that are basically these districts of churches that are comprised. And so there were several different churches, I want to say about 50 something churches that contain the Diocese of Beaumont. And on the youth council, I was actually responsible for a set of churches. So on top of I'm dealing with my own coming out journey and my own personal faith and religion, I'm also trying to instill this embodiment of faith journeys into other youth. And so
Yes.
I
Yes.
really went through a time with this. I remember going into a lot of prayer and just thinking about, what does this mean? What does this mean for
Mhm.
me? Not only navigating the sexuality, but also just how do I navigate this with my faith? How do I
Yeah.
reconcile the two things? I know what I've been taught, and this is a sin based off of the
Mhm.
teachings of the church.
Mhm.
And so how do I even navigate this?
Yeah.
One of the most profound moments for me in that time frame before I left to leave Beaumont and go to college was being in church. And we had a new pastor that started, a new priest that started at the church probably about a month before I was to leave, or so. And we're sitting in on our pews on Sunday, and the priest says in his sermon that gay people should not be allowed to take communion, and that we won't have them taking communion in church. And I never forget, my mom and I and my dad, we all had kind of separate journeys through this, but for my mom and I, because we were so close, we're sitting in the pew together, and it'd been probably a few months since I'd come out at that point. And I remember saying, okay, well, fine. If that's what he is saying, then I won't do it. I won't take communion. I just won't do it. I'm not going to, be bullied into this.
How old were you again when that happened?
So I was 17 still,
You were still
when it
17.
happened.
Okay.
So I came out around my birthday. So I would say probably like early January, February, and so my birthday was in April, and so this was probably like March timeframe when this occurred. And I remember my mom; she was really hurt by this that I would not take communion. Because again, this is a sacrament, right? This is something that's very
But had
spiritually
she
important to
had
us.
she heard the pastor say that?
She sat in the
She had
pew
heard the
right with me when this happened. We were in the pew together when this occurred.
So
And
did you and
so
your mom talk about this later? Did your mom talk to the pastor? How
she
did you
never
all
talked to
navigate
the
that?
she never talked to the pastor that I'm aware of, or had
Uh-huh.
that conversation. For she and I, it was more of, I can't, she's like, I can't believe that you're doing this. Now, this is your choice, apparent, obviously, if you don't want to take it. But, I think she, in a way, was, well, you can still do it. Like, he doesn't know you're gay, like, so you can still take communion. But I
Yes.
really was just, nope, that's not what he wants, so I'm not going to do it. And so,
You knew who you were on the
mhm,
inside. You knew what you felt, how you were identifying, how you were relating with the world. And for you to own your truth, that meant, okay, if he said gay people shouldn't be taking the communion, then I know I'm clearly gay. So that's how you
absolutely.
felt would be owning your truth at the time.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. I needed to be true to myself, and that was one of the means in which I could be true to myself. And so, in that realm, after graduating and leaving to go to college, it really is where my faith journey, I would say, took a pause in some ways. I really decided that I wanted to explore other religions, and other faith journeys, and just
Mhm.
see
Makes
how
sense.
other
Mhm.
faith journeys and other religions looked at this. And so I explored world religions. I went to several different churches. I visited Baptist, Methodist churches, learned about Buddhism and Taoism, and just several other religions. Within that process, I did a lot of studying and just understanding, and it helped me to evolve along that journey. During that time frame too, in college, I joined a gospel choir because, again, for me, music was a very important outlet, and that was a connection to my
Yeah.
faith. So for me, it was like, well, I have this opportunity that I can join this, and still have that connection that I want, and not necessarily in a formalized setting. Of course, you have people from different faith journeys and backgrounds. I went to
Yeah.
TCU,
Mhm.
and what I experienced was a combination of things that happened. I had people that were super supportive of me in my, journey as a gay man. I had others that, were very ingrained in their religion, that came from, more staunch religions that had their beliefs set, and that gays were not welcome, that this was an abomination, to the point where I actually received letters in my mailbox or in my locker during college that were, just saying, oh, we're praying for you, we're thinking about you.
Oh, wow.
Some of these passive aggressive microaggressions that
Wow.
occur.
Hmm.
And for me, I think again, I was just always a strong-willed kid, and and a strong-willed individual. So where I feel that for a lot of students, a lot of teens that go through this situation, I I didn't let it shake me.
Hmm.
I knew that again, I was being true to myself and who I was at the core.
Hmm.
And so, if anything, it just gave me more resolve to be more involved in other organizations. So I joined a local LGBTQ organization that was on campus,
Hmm.
and spoke at different functions, joined several panels, and just really ingrained myself into really living
Yeah.
my authentic life the way that I saw it. And so, for me, even in that college experience, I learned a lot and grew
Yeah.
even more. Um,
It sounds, if you don't mind me just interjecting
sure.
a little bit, it sounds like you had a strong enough sense of self and were able to define your path on your own terms, which is a
Hmm.
huge strength. That's a huge strength. That's a huge blessing. Not all LGBTQ youth are we're not all built the same way, regardless of our identities, right? And
Hmm.
so from what I can see, it sounds like it's positioned you in a place where you can be someone who offers support, who offers, service, reaches out, kind of holds the torch, so to speak, and presses forward. And I'm going to guess that's what eventually connected you to the Dallas Hope Charities, is that
Hmm.
tendency that you have, that natural
Absolutely.
draw.
One of my personal mantras for myself, in living into my true north, is live inspired and be the light. And what I mean by that is that I look at things that are around me and people that are around me, and the environments that I am, and that's what inspires me. The
Mhm.
beauty in things, and just watching people sometimes at the park, just interact with each other, and those things inspire me. And then the be the light portion of this is that in whatever ways that I can give back, and spread a little bit of goodness into the world, even
Yeah.
if it's just affecting one person, that's a win in my book that, I get to do that on a day in and day out basis. And to your point, that's really what drew me into Dallas Hope Charities. I had, really kind of just stopped church after college, really didn't do any experiencing of any type of religion. Still very much music was a part of that for me. However, when I met my now husband in 2015, one of the things that he introduced me to was a church here in Dallas called Cathedral of Hope.
Mhm.
And that brought a significant change for me. It felt like home. I felt like I had a safe space. Again, I could be my authentic self in that environment. And I had a place where I could share my music, and for me, that's part of that light.
Yeah.
And so after, I think it was probably 3 or 4 years of attending, then our pastor at the time really was intentional about, I want to have this organization that we can form. And so really, like I said, out of these meal programs that we had at the church was when this nonprofit was born of Dallas Hope
Oh, wow.
Charities.
So you were there
And
from the inception. You were there from the very creation and formation.
pretty close to it. I
Okay.
joined not too long after they formed, like probably about
Okay.
a year
I
or so
see.
after they actually formed everything. And at the time, I really saw that this organization meant something special. We were doing meal programs and this homeless outreach, but part of the thought was that we wanted to really help LGBTQ youth. And so they had gotten together and had been able to, basically lease out a apartment to house youth in. And I mean, it was just a one-bedroom apartment. So, we maybe had a couple of youth that we were able to support and help, but it was something, it was a start. And eventually we were able to get a larger apartment, and have it be 2 bedrooms where we could house four, youth in it. But there were bigger dreams at play. And
Yeah.
I always knew for me in the organization itself that there was an opportunity here for us to help so many more youth. And I actually had several opportunities to meet some of the youth over my time, with the organization and just to hear their stories. And it was gut wrenching, Megan,
I
to
can
hear
imagine.
the
I can
pain that
only
they went through and
imagine.
the hurt. I never once felt that in my coming out, in my experience with my family, that I never had a place to call home. I never felt that. I always felt that I had somewhere that I could belong and be included in. And maybe that, we didn't necessarily see eye to eye or agree, but I never felt like I didn't have a place that I could call home. I never felt like my parents were going to be on the cusp of kicking me out because of their belief systems, because they loved me too much for that. And it just hurt me to see these kids, because of their parents, so focused in on this belief structure that they would literally turn their back on their children, on their flesh and blood and who they loved. And, I think like God's greatest commandment was to love, right? This is the fundamental of all things. And literally you're doing this to your kids. And not
Yeah.
only are you doing this to your kids, but now you're putting them out in the street where they have nowhere to go.
So I want to pause right there. This is a really, I think this is the crux of the mission of Dallas Hope Charities. And Sidney, maybe you can jump in and share some of those more specifics with us. But I think this is a concept that's hard for many people to really understand, wrap their minds around it, and then actually accept that this is the lived reality for many. You said youth. Sidney, can you give us an idea of like the age ranges of these kiddos? And I'd love to hear how, you came to be a part of. There's only 3 staff members, correct, at the Dallas Hope Charities, and the rest is all through volunteers or hope dealers, as you like to call them.
Yeah, so we just added our 4th staff member in June. So Jordan
Okay.
is our new Hope Center manager. So it's kind of 3 folks on our staff, and then we have Tamika, who's our CEO. Our kind of main age range, especially for the Hope Center, is youth between the ages of 18 to 24. And so, of course, folks that are like 17, they can join our wait list, but they won't be able to be eligible for the actual program until they turn 18.
So that tells me, though, that there are youth younger than the age of 18 that are being turned out of their homes by their families.
Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of it too, a book that you had shared with me for our book club happening in November was Coming Out to the Streets by, I think their name is Brandon Andrew Robinson. And I think a really good point that they had made is also to kind of think about the children who decide that like being homeless or facing housing instability is like to them a higher priority than staying with their families because their families are so violent or just have made them feel so uncomfortable. So even with the folks that are 17, like to them, they've kind of decided that like going to this program with 7 other strangers and living on their own, to them, that outweighs staying with their families who they've known their whole lives. And I think that was like a really important reframing for me, just to kind of rethink the way that I approach the folks that we work with and stuff like that. Just looking at like the level of independence that our youth either have had or like have had to develop, and just the way that that kind of shows through in the way that they navigate our programs and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. So currently, well, you mentioned a waiting list. Mm-hmm. Can you give our listeners an idea of how long this waiting list is and what that means? Mm-hmm. And then I'd like to talk a little bit about, other alternatives, because this last time I asked you, this waiting list was quite long. So I'm sure it's similar.
Yeah. So the last time I heard, I think the waiting list is at about 400. And so with our current program right now, we only have 8 beds available for folks. And so those 400 are folks that have applied while the beds were full, and they're kind of just waiting to hear back from us and see if they're eligible for the program. And sometimes just like the speed that we can get back to them really just depends on like how quickly the youth in our program are able to get independence, whatever that means for them. So sometimes it could be just a couple months, sometimes it could be the full 12 months for folks. It really just depends on our capacity to serve others. And so one way that we've kind of tried to like mitigate the waiting list is build connection with other organizations in North Texas. We have a couple folks up in Plano and Fort Worth, and they have like their own transitional living programs. So we try to refer folks out, but again, that kind of depends on their capacity, because some of them only have like 8 beds or 24 beds. So across the board, it's really hard like making those calls, because you can like, as a provider making those calls, you kind of get bounced around. So you can only imagine what it's like for the youth going through those actual scenarios and situations.
Beginning October 5th, the Dallas Hope Charities Collective Hope Coalition will be hosting their first ever book club and wrap up in November in honor of Hunger and Homelessness Awareness Week, November 13th through the 18th. Every week, we'll be discussing Dr. Brandon Andrew Robinson's book, Coming Out to the Streets, and how the book ties in to the Dallas Hope Charities fight to end hopelessness. It begins Thursday, October 5th through Thursday, November 16th. If you would like more information, please send an email to chc@dallashopecharities.org. Books can be purchased on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, UC Press, or through used bookstores. If cost is a barrier, please reach out for alternative options. What can the average person who's listening today and is feeling their heart pricked by these stories and is feeling moved, what can the average person do? Or is there anything that they can do to help lessen the pain and the tough journeys that these kids have ahead of them?
So I think my personal advice, and Roscoe can definitely jump in, would one to be to support the actual organizations that are doing the work, because a lot of the constraint for us is just like the physical capacity to hold folks. And of course, we would love to have like more and more homes, but it's really limited on funding and staffing. So I think either by volunteering or financially supported, even just like sharing information about different resources that's in different organizations is really helpful. I think also just like kind of having those conversations, especially with other parents, about like what does support look like for your kids? Like, is it conditional? Because I think like when it comes, I mean, I'm not a parent, so I can only speak from the outside looking in. But what I kind of see is that folks like they want to have children, and they're not really thinking through like, okay, but if my kid is gay, am I still gonna love them? What does love look like? And like that unconditional support. So I think even just having those conversations really goes a long way in like preparing folks for when those things happen. So that's kind of just my personal 2 cents.
Thank you.
Yeah, definitely with Sidney. Again, resources are limited. This is something that you've heard her say, 400 plus kids on this waiting list. And as much as we want to help all of them, we're limited in the capacity to be able to do that. We want to open more homes. We've been really, really fortunate that we have a great partnership that is allowing us to, potentially look at being able to open, additional homes for our youth. But we can have homes all day if we don't have the resources, the staffing, the clothing. I mean, you think these are homeless youth, they don't have anything. Sometimes they have simply a backpack that they're bringing in with them, with maybe just one pair of change of clothes. So clothing essentials, I mean, just all those things that you think of when you think of home. That's what those kids need, is all of that type of support and that level of support. To Sidney's point with parents, educating yourself about the issues, thinking about what's going on. There were a couple of stats that I pulled up from the Williams Institute on Sexual Orientation. This was a study done back in 2020, and this is nationally, but about 22% of homeless youth across the nation identify themselves as LGBTQIA+. Most of these folks reported some type of homelessness at some stage in their lives, whether it been youth or into adulthood. And we, really can only track youth 18 and up. And so that's really why we focus specifically on that 18 and 24 age group. But they said about 71% of them are homeless after turning 18, and then 1/5 were homeless before they turned 18. So about 8.6% were homeless in their lives. And that's a large percentage. Just in Dallas alone, you look at just school district wise, Dallas ISD, there's over close to 4,000 kids that are identified as homeless youth that they're supporting. And we don't even know exactly out of that number who identifies as LGBTQ. It's just so hard to track. The city and organizations such as ours have done a lot of work to try to get an idea of what the exact number is. But we're talking about a population that is transient. Sometimes they're here, sometimes they may be elsewhere. And so trying to keep track of these people is very difficult as well too. And so we're trying to do whatever we can, to outreach and touch them, even if it's that we can't necessarily provide them a bed in our transitional program. Can we get them somewhere else? A lot of these shelters are fighting for resources. Sometimes, to Sidney's point, they may only have one bed that's dedicated to LGBTQ. And so with that's even a struggle sometimes, because again, it's that fight for resources. And so the more that we can bring in then that just means that that's more homes that we can open up, redo, get the resources, the beds, all of the furnishings,
Yeah.
stocking the pantry and just ensuring that we have something for them to be able to feel stable and feel valued and feel like they belong somewhere.
Right. Roscoe, if we can rewind a little bit back to 17-year-old Roscoe. You
Mm-hmm.
had said something earlier, you grew up, you were taught and you heard come out of the mouths of you said your mom, I'm assuming your dad,
Mm-hmm.
we love everyone, we accept everyone, we love all. And then you mentioned when you came out that message shifted a little bit. Obviously, it didn't shift to the point where you felt threatened in your home, or you didn't feel safe in your home,
Mm-hmm.
or that you felt the need, Sidney, as you brought up, it would be perhaps easier for you to live with some strangers and try to get a hold of your own mental, emotional, spiritual health versus remain in your home.
Mm-hmm.
Can you share? You talked about parents educating themselves, and I think that's important as well. But I think they have to be willing to lean into this idea that there's another way to
Mm-hmm.
understand their child's experience, and to really allow themselves to listen, not with the
Mm-hmm.
intent to respond or have a rebuttal of some kind, but with the sincere purpose of just listening to their story, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, can you share what made it possible for you to remain in your home after you came out?
Yeah, so it was them. To your point, they had their own journey that they had to go through.
Yes, you mentioned that. Yeah.
And what happened was, and I can talk about this even as an adult because we've had conversations since
Okay.
then, but they got together and had discussions and conversations with each other. And they sought counseling. They sought counseling for me, at first, and then realized, okay, this is much deeper. Like, this is something that we need to connect on the two of
Mm-hmm.
us. And so they went to counseling. What
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know, and this is what I mentioned earlier, that there was other factors in play with this, was that my mom's brother, who is her youngest brother, had come out as HIV positive not that long before I came out. And
Okay.
so when you think about these dynamics, right, it's that I'm coming out, this has happened with my uncle, this is associated, with, okay, HIV, AIDS being a gay disease at that time frame. And so they're processing all of this real time, right? Like,
Yeah.
what's going to happen to my baby? What's
Right.
going to occur? So one of the things that they did outside of counseling, and I will never forget this day, they went to Houston and they went to Lobos Bookstore, which is a LGBTQ bookstore in Houston, and they picked up a bunch of books and they brought them home. And they were all books, dedicated to parents and understanding. And I
Uh-huh.
remember I came home from school and I walk in the door and I look at the table and I'm like, where are all of these books? Where did this come from? And my mom was like, well, you got this really interesting book. I think you should read this one. And like, we're going to read this one. And it just, you could see they were trying to make the effort. And
Mhm.
it was not overnight by any means. I mean, it took
Yeah.
months, years. I mean, even into my adult life for them to come to a full realization and really accept fully me. My dad and I, before I got married, actually had a really interesting conversation about this. And it was when after I proposed to my husband, and I called each of my parents separately because I knew I needed to have separate conversations with them about this. So
Mhm.
I called my dad and told him what was happening. And he was like, I'm so happy for you. Like, I'm really excited. And he's like, well, can we talk about this though? And I said, sure. And he said, this is something I never told you or expressed to you. He said, but one of the things that I struggled with when you came out was that you were the firstborn son. And as the firstborn son, I expected the family line to be carried on in
Okay.
the next generation. And that for me was eye opening. And it
Mhm.
led to this really fascinating conversation with my dad to say, Dad, okay, well, wait, that can still happen. I can still have a kid, and you have my little brother who said two of his own kids as well, too. So family line continues. I said, but I get it. I now have this perspective that I did not have before. And it led to
Right.
this really beautiful conversation. I have
Right.
some of the closest relationship that I've ever had with my parents. Now, we
Yeah.
talk almost every other day. they've come up to visit, and stayed with my husband and I multiple times. And it's just beautiful, and it's something that I will always cherish, that we went through this journey and we came out on this side of it in a significant way. But it took them being willing to
Mhm.
come and meet me. And it took me being
Yeah.
open to meeting them and being able to have that open conversation. If
Yeah.
that would not have happened, if there'd have been this block on either side, none of this would have occurred.
Right.
But, to have them both walk me down the aisle at my wedding, that means the world.
Yeah. You said something so important. You said to have them be able to meet me and me meet them. I think that's what this is all about, and why I feel strongly about my role at the Dallas Hope Charities to facilitate the Hopeful Spaces group, to create a space that is safe for parents and allies, caregivers, anyone really who wants to come and try to process some of these things and talk about it. And although you may not, your father, you may not have explicitly stated this, I mean, what his belief about the family line is really directly correlated to systemic patriarchy and what we as a
Mm-hmm.
society, the water we're swimming in that we don't even realize that we're swimming in. And there's so many of those beliefs that are tied to the LGBTQ plus population as well.
Absolutely.
And Sidney, I would love for you to share for our listeners. I mean, the ultimate goal, we have hopeful spaces, and that's a segue opportunity to a really significant part of the Dallas Hope Charities mission, and that is your Hopeful Discussions program. And I would love for you to share with our listeners a little bit more about that and that connection with the Hopeful Spaces group.
So Hopeful Spaces, we started, I think, back in March. And like you said, it was with the intention to give parents like a free space where they can connect with other parents, because I do understand that like connecting is kind of a big part of having those conversations and really kind of getting the context and just making those mental connections and just giving folks a space to, like you said, ask those questions, because I understand that like folks have a ton of questions, just don't know like who to go to, or who to trust, especially with so many different like resources and information out there. And just really kind of give folks that space to learn really how to support their kids, because I get like it's not easy and there's no one size fits all way. So we meet twice a month. One, we do like an evening time. I think it's the fourth Tuesday of the month. And then we also meet in the afternoon, the first Wednesday of the month. And again, really just trying to kind of meet folks where they're at. It's completely judgment free. Again, I totally understand that like this is new information for a lot of people.
Yeah.
And it kind of ties into our larger program of Hopeful Discussions, which is where folks, again, kind of get like an hour and a half to 2 hour space to meet, if not with me, one of our volunteers or a Dallas Hope Charity staff member, and really learn kind of like the, I guess not academic, but more like the formal definitions of different identities, and how to support those identities. So we have like an allyship one where it's kind of super broad, just learning about sex and gender and sexual orientation. And again, just really giving folks a chance to make those connections. Like we've had folks ask, well, do I have to identify as cisgender? And it's like, you could identify how you want to. Like that's not on us to tell you how to identify,
Right.
but I just want to give folks kind of that toolbox to understand that if your kid comes and says, I'm pansexual, you understand what that means. If they say I'm non-binary, like you at least have context for that and can kind of be better equipped to have those conversations. Then we have a youth specific workshop where we give folks the tools to kind of better navigate the coming out conversation and create space for youth to feel comfortable coming back repeatedly as they make new connections or start forming new relationships. But again, just overall, like the big purpose is to give folks like a judgment-free zone to really learn and grow so that they can go back and support their kids and hopefully prevent them from going into our programs. So,
And correct me if I have this wrong, but ultimately your goal is to provide a safe space, kind of like what Roscoe was talking about, to help the parents and their child or young adult be able to meet in the middle somehow, not asking one to completely change and be who the other is necessarily, but find those places of common ground. And it occurred to me, Roscoe, as you were sharing, I felt that emotion as you shared how both your parents walked you down the aisle. And that, I don't believe, would have been able to happen if your parents had been acting from a place of fear versus from a place of love, or at least curiosity, wonder, awe, just an open mind, and one that is willing to just hear, just listen to their child.
And
Absolutely.
Sorry.
Oh, go ahead, Sidney.
I was just going to say, and I think what I like about the program too is, like, as a staff member, I kind of get to bear the brunt of like the questions and the pushback, and we kind of get to soften folks and at least have that initial interaction and conversation. So when folks go back to their kids, they at least have an idea and some context, and hopefully that makes it a lot easier for the kids themselves to navigate those discussions with their parents.
So you're kind of the sounding board, or maybe act as a verbal punching bag, maybe.
Yeah.
Help them really just get their frustrations or confusion or issues, or just vent and get it out.
And that's so important for what the work is that Sidney and the team are doing. I can't say that my parents had a safe space necessarily. They found resources, and they carved out this little niche for themselves, and had, looked like, had friends that they could talk with and have conversation with. But not every family has that. That they can trust enough, to have that level of conversation. And so I do think that was another important piece of it, is that they had a network of people that they could feel safe with as well, too, to have those conversations. Definitely. And it was a journey, right? I mean, like I said, it was an overnight thing. We had multiple conversations, multiple emotional, like very emotional conversations. And like I said, yeah, just to get to that kind of this culmination moment, of that happening did not come by chance. It was a lot of work that went into that from both sides. And it ended up being this very beautiful moment that I will always remember. It was that significant. And I know not every kid gets that opportunity, not even close sometimes. And so my wish and my hope is that with the work that we're doing here at Dallas Hope Charities, that we can at least give some of these kids some semblance of that, and some of that beauty.
Yeah, you're right. A lot of these families don't necessarily, at least up to this point, haven't had that opportunity. When the fear of the unknown or uncertainty is driving a lot of your emotions, your actions, your words, it can be hard to get your bearings. The phrase "beyond the shadow of doubt" is a common one among conservative faiths, Christian faiths. It's one that I grew up with, to know something beyond the shadow of a doubt. But what I've learned is I don't know that it's possible to really know or understand something beyond the shadow of a doubt. That has a negative connotation, really, like doubt is a bad thing. And that's why I dropped the A. And this is beyond the shadow of doubt. Doubt, I'm trying to paint it in a positive light. This is a good thing, right? And leaning into our doubts, allowing them, peeling back the shame that might be coming along with that, I believe is really one of the first steps in, having the conversations like you mentioned, where you were able to meet in the middle with your parents, or to participate in the Hopeful Spaces group or the Hopeful Discussions group, and be able to take active steps towards improving the situations and the lives of our LGBTQ plus youth. And on that note, a question I always like to wrap up with is, what does it mean to you to live beyond the shadow of doubt?
So there's a ode hymnal that came to mind when you were saying this earlier, Megan, and it's the words are, "We come this far by faith, leaning on the Lord." And I think in this context, the thing that got us through that doubt, that fear, was just that we had faith, faith in myself that whatever was to come was going to be okay on the other side of it. And I didn't know, I had no idea, but I had faith that it was going to be. And I believe my parents did too, that no matter what, we were going to get through this and we were going to make it out of the other side of it together. And we had to have a level of faith in not only, a higher power, but also in ourselves and what we were capable of, and thinking beyond what was in the here and now and what the future could be. So that's what I think of when you describe that.
That is amazing. Sidney, anything to add?
I think, and I want to say Roscoe kind of touched on it earlier, but really just kind of centering love and everything. And especially like I was raised Christian, so I know like kind of one of the big themes is loving your neighbor and loving yourself. And I think that that is kind of, well, not kind of, it really goes a long way in the work that we do. I think as a community, like if you love one another, you're not going to let someone be homeless, especially not your child, or a child that you know or care for. As folks doing this work, it's definitely a labor of love. And again, I think just kind of wanting better for our communities and the folks that we serve, as like a parent or parent adjacent, just having that love for your child and having that kind of outweigh any beliefs that you've had. And just, yeah, I think for me, like really centering love for me is going beyond the shadow of doubt.
That's so beautiful. I love it. Well, I have a list of quick questions. I'm looking for one-word answers. This helps us get to know you guys just a little bit better if you're game. I've never done a two-person interview. Like that. I'm at ping pong, managing a ping pong match or something. Anyway, do you have a favorite book?
Mine is probably The Outsiders by S.E. Hinton. I don't know. I love that book.
Oh my gosh. And like I completely blanked on the name of it, and this is horrible because this is gonna be my favorite book. But it's by Case and Callender. I remember, yes, Case and Callender, and it's King and the Dragonflies. It's one of my favorite books that I've read. I'll have to tell you more about it, but it is a beautifully done book.
We can look it up now that we know the name.
Yes, King of the Dragonflies. It is a very, very beautiful, poignant book.
Okay, would you consider yourselves an introvert or an extrovert?
I would say introvert.
Oh, definitely extrovert.
I knew it. I did say it out loud, but yeah, I was pretty certain. Okay. A favorite artist?
Mariah Carey.
Okay, there you go. Awesome.
Oh, that's always a tough one for me, but Patti LaBelle.
Okay, both good choices. Are you a night owl or a morning lark?
I'm a night owl for sure.
I'm a combo of both. I just keep going all day long. It just is a cycle.
You're just an Energizer bunny.
It is.
That's great. Okay, what about a celebrity crush? Do you have a celebrity crush?
So I don't know if y'all have seen Moonlight, but the one that plays Chiron, like the main character, he's really attractive to me. Like definitely.
I know. It's new for me.
Oh gosh, I got a ton of them, but this one came up recently because my friends were like, "You're crazy," and I was like, "It was Pitbull." Look, I know, but I don't know. It is something about the swagger that gets me every time. I don't know.
That is the first time Pitbull has been mentioned on my podcast. That's great. Do you do still or carbonated water, or are you a diet soda fan?
Probably water. That's definitely my go-to.
Yeah, I was gonna say still water unless I can find a Topo Chico somewhere.
Yeah, same. And the furthest place you've traveled?
I've been to Sydney, Australia. I studied abroad there for like a summer program.
Ooh, fun. Amazing.
Yeah, and I think my furthest would be yeah, I was gonna say I had to think about this and make sure this is right, but probably the Caribbean, the Dominican Republic. And so
that's a good place to go to.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if folks wanted to connect with you or Sidney with the Dallas Hope Charities, what's the best way for them to do that? And Roscoe, I know you're a volunteer at the Dallas Hope Charities and you also have your own full-time job, but if folks wanted to ask questions or just connect, where would they be able to do that?
Folks can reach me through email. It's syerger, YERGER at DallasHopeCharities.org.
Okay, I'll leave that in the show notes.
And I have a Dallas Hope Charities email, but I'm going to butcher it because I have too many different emails. So the best way they can do it is probably to reach out to me through social media, and I'll give you my Instagram, and it's at Roscoe. It's ROSCOE, Craig, CRAIGCO. And that's the best way that they can connect with me.
Awesome. I will leave all of that in the show notes. It has been a pleasure to chat with you both and get to know you and hear a little bit more about your stories and about your belief in the mission of the Dallas Hope Charities and your association there. So thank you so much to both of you for all that you do to help serve the LGBTQ plus youth and young adults of Dallas, Texas.
Thank you for having us.
Yes, thank you for having us. Thank you so much.
Hopeful Spaces is a Dallas Hope Charities component of Hopeful Discussions, sponsored by Mercedes-Benz Financial Services USA. It's a free monthly parent, ally, or caregiver support group facilitated by Megan Skidmore Coaching. Email chc@dallashopecharities.org for more info. Hopeful Spaces is a Dallas Hope Charities component of Hopeful Discussions, sponsored by Mercedes-Benz Financial Services USA. It's a free monthly parent, ally, or caregiver support group facilitated by Megan Skidmore Coaching. Email chc@dallashopecharities.org for more info. The Beyond the Shadow of Doubt podcast is a proud member of the Dialogue Podcast Network, which is part of the Dialogue Journal found at dialoguejournal.com. Founder Eugene England was a Mormon writer, teacher, and scholar who wrote, "My faith encourages my curiosity and awe. It thrusts me out into relationship with all creation and encourages me to enter into dialogue. My hope is that this podcast is an extension of that vision." Visit meganskidmorecoaching.com to find this podcast and additional free resources, including the link for a complimentary coaching session. Follow me on Facebook or Instagram for more, or to send me a DM. Help the podcast grow. Please follow, review, and share with a friend.